I'm concerned that we find ourselves in an increasingly divided society, and that perhaps the most significant divide that we face is a cultural one. And I think that we need to reach out of our own echo chambers if we are to heal society and also to stop Brexit. If we look at the way in which society is in the wake of the referendum vote, we can see divisions in all sorts of different ways. There's the divisions between young and old, the divisions between rich and poor, divisions between those who live in the cities and those who live in the towns and the rural areas. The impact of those divisions also means that we see a decline in trust more generally across society. Trust in our institutions, trust in organs of the media, for example, where the accusations of bias and counter-bias are thrown around, where the BBC can be accused of photoshopping hats and such like, as we have seen over the weekend, where people say that they have had enough of experts and that cabinet ministers themselves can even say that. And in fact, even our trust in elections is decreasing. We saw in the 2014 referendum into Scottish independence, the Electoral Commission said that they had seen the highest ever amount of distrust in that election, with 34% of people after the election saying that they were concerned there was either a lot or a little electoral fraud. And since then, we've seen that percentage get even higher in the 2015 election and even higher still in the 2017 election when it went up to 38%. And in this climate of distrust, all sorts of conspiracy theories and half-truths can flourish. A random blogger can apparently take on the same level of seriousness or credibility as very well-researched and thought-out journalism. And I think that this is poisoning our society. Going back to Scotland, we have been living with this division for more than 3 years now. It's 3.5 years since we had the referendum on independence in Scotland. And I am particularly concerned with the way in which society is still very divided indeed between those who voted to stay in the UK and those who voted to leave. And what we saw in the aftermath of that referendum was this sort of disbelief from those on the losing side. I remember vividly a woman got in touch with me who lives in my constituency, who was a fervent supporter of Scotland becoming independent. And she was clearly very distressed by the result. And she wrote to me at quite some length about how she was absolutely convinced that the result had been rigged and that it was not a fair referendum process. And she said to me in this that but she couldn't quite understand it because everybody she spoke to was voting yes. Now, to put this in context, my constituency voted about 2/3 to stay in the UK, 2/3 no. And the particular town that this woman lived in and the part of that town was even more fervently no than the general constituency. So it's entirely likely that about 3 in every 4 voters in the street that she lived on actually voted no. But her perception was that everybody that she knew was voting yes. And that just shows the danger of the echo chambers that get created. But I think the cultural divide is perhaps the most significant of all, more so than age, economics, geography. Now, I want to ask you all a question, and the question is this. Is it more important that children should be considerate or well-mannered? Considerate or well-mannered? Now, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. Hands up if you think it's more important that children should be considerate. And hands up who thinks it more important to be well-mannered. Well, in this room, we've got a clear preference for considerate. I have to say, as a mother of a 4-year-old, I would often settle for either. It's a question that on first glance doesn't seem to be very different. But it actually does reveal a difference in worldview. And the reason that I ask that question is because there's a fascinating piece of research that Professor Eric Kaufmann at Birkbeck University has been doing about the Brexit vote and about cephalological events more generally. And he has found that the answer to that question is a stronger predictor of whether somebody voted for Brexit, and indeed this also holds true in America for voting for Trump, a stronger predictor of whether somebody voted for Brexit than their income is. And we know there was a significant income effect. So actually, that divide between people's cultural outlook, whether it's about an open liberal outlook or whether people prefer authority and order and respect for that security and stability. Interestingly enough, you can look at other questions such as support for the death penalty or whether or not people think things were better in the past, and you will see a similar trend. And this, I think, gives us lots of lessons we need to learn, because language is important. The way in which we might talk about the benefits of the European Union to liberals would include the values of diversity and how positive it is to have those new ideas and to have that change going forward. And that works when you're talking to liberal-minded people. But if people have a different worldview, if they have a more conservative outlook, then those exciting ideas of change are not going to feel something that's positive. They might feel like there's something more threatening. And so that's why it's important to think about the language that we use when we're talking to people who have a range of different values and outlooks. And people with a more conservative outlook might actually not be excited by huge change, but painting the changes and the benefits of immigration in the realm of what we have already experienced in Britain for hundreds of years, and that people who are in the establishment here in Britain already have got history of having been immigrants, and therefore that's what happens. People come to our country and become part of our country. That might be the way to get those messages across to an audience which is not liberal-minded and with that value set. And so I think my final and key point that I want to make is that we need to reach out of our own echo chambers to heal society and to stop Brexit. So I gave that example earlier of the woman who was very concerned about the result of the independence referendum, which was a powerful example of what the echo chamber can be like and how it can feed in on itself and encourage people to believe that everybody else is of a similar mind. We are in real danger of creating our own echo chambers as we respond to the Brexit vote as well. It can be very London-centric, it can be very city-centric. And in reality, wrapping ourselves up in the European Union flag, while it might make ourselves feel better, is not going to change people's minds, and the people whose minds in particular we need to change. So I think we need to reach out. We need to do this online and have those discussions and debates in a civilised and respectful way. And I do see that happening, but I also sometimes see sweeping generalisations being made about all Leave voters, and sometimes those debates being conducted without the respect that I think is essential. And we need to listen in person to people who voted differently to ourselves. We need to try and understand what their motivations are and not assume that that makes them a bad person intrinsically because they happen to come to a different judgment. And we need to frame our points not only in a way that people who share liberal values will appreciate. I think this is important for having a cohesive society, but I also think it's important if we're going to stop Brexit. I do believe that it is still possible to stop Brexit. There is not much time, but it is still possible. And it relies on us creating a momentum that when we know the deal that comes back, that people want to have that final say and have a vote on that deal. That's job one. And then if we're successful in that, job two is to make sure that we win that vote. And in order to do both of those things, we need some people who voted Leave to change their minds, to think again, to consider that perhaps the judgment that they came to 2 years ago, in the light of new information, is not the same judgment they might make again today. So that's what I want you to bear in mind. I want you to enjoy today, get inspired, but I would urge you not to get too comfortable, because the job that we have to do is to bridge that divide. Thank you very much.